want to fend for myself, and I want to build people up for them to fend for. Mr. Paul Steele, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you for having me, Clark.
You are an author of the book The Law. You are a podcaster, and you are a man overcoming abuse and addictions, and you're on your healing journey to a healthier life, man. And that's something I can relate to, and it's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me. Just again, like you said, on that healing journey and trying to spread that message of hope, because there is hope for people like us. And I know there was a place in my life where I was definitely hopeless. So coming out the other side of that is it's a beautiful thing.
You know, I think you can plateau in your healing journey if you don't find a way to help others.
You're absolutely correct.
Whether it's just like raising your hand at an AA meeting or going to church and helping somebody struggling, or working at a food kitchen, or just making posts on Instagram and Facebook and answering people's responses. Something you got to do something to give back to others.
Well, I mean, to me in my recovery, that's the name of the game at this point, is pouring into others and trying to share that experience, strength, and hope, because helping other people overcome is what gives all those things that we've been through. It gives them purpose.
I always say I can't proclaim to be healed and healthy and sit on my couch with a clicker in my hands and just watch Netflix all day. I gotta be doing something to help others.
Well, there's no such thing as stagnation in this program. To me, you're either moving forwards or you're going backwards. And I can't afford another relapse because I had a few of those in the past. And it all came from thinking I was good. Like, okay, I got it now. And that's a scary place to be. When you got the I got it, that's a red flag.
What was your book, The Law, about? And how'd you come up with the title, The Law?
It was, for years, I had all these different principles and just stuff that I'd accumulated, that I had researched and learned all about. And it was all, ancient wisdom, psychology, all this stuff. And I kind of melded it all together and finally put it all down on paper. And if we look at our brain as a hard drive, I feel like I freed up about 40% of the space that was in there by putting this all down on paper. But it's all about leadership, influence, purpose, power, awareness. And there's a lot of, the power of the subconscious mind, and how that works in a relatable way, and how to actually put it into practice in your life instead of these, stuff that's just kind of the hoodoo out there in the ether, like this is how you do it. So very practical.
So, Paul, in order for us to get a message, we have to go through a mess. So why don't we dive into your history and take us through, the mess you had to go through in life. Start us off where you grew up, and then bring us through it.
To tell the story of my childhood, if I were to sit here and tell you that it was all traumatic, it would not be authentic or true. I have a great family. Growing up, my father was a head basketball coach of a private Christian university here in Tennessee, and my grandfather was the head pastor of the big church in town. So I grew up, in a public lens, I guess you would say. But it was great. I traveled around the country as a kid. I kid around my daycare was, 10, 6'10", 7-foot tall black guys. That was, that was my daycare, growing up, but it was enjoyable. But, when I was about 10 years old, I was at my grandparents' house, and I was up in the corner bedroom playing around with my brother. I really don't remember the exact details, but my uncle came in and, to make a long story short, he sexually assaulted me. And, at that age, you just I didn't know. I didn't really know what was happening, but what I knew was that it was wrong. I knew that something was wrong. And, after it happened, I got home and I told my parents, and I said, "Hey, this is what just happened." And, you know, I I don't know, but I know that it wasn't right. And so immediately my dad called my grandfather and they scheduled a meeting, and we went and had like a formal meeting at the church with me, my parents, my grandparents, and my uncle, and sat down in a room. And, to make a long story short, they decided the best thing to do was to sweep it under the rug. Um, and that to me was like being victimized again. Um, I felt like nobody was protecting me. I felt like I did the right thing in a bad situation, and nobody protected me. Now I say that from an adult hindsight perspective because I don't really remember exactly how I felt in that moment about them deciding to sweep it under the rug. But as I got older and really understood the dynamics of what was going on, it was like, oh, we're protecting reputations instead of protecting me. And so that built a huge amount of resentment that I had towards my parents, my grandparents, and my uncle that did it. Um, and so those were things that I had to address later in recovery, which we can get into later.
Just to stop you for a second, like I can't even imagine like getting abused and the next day having to sit down with the person who just sexually abused you. Like
Well,
that had to be traumatic as hell.
it what was worse than that was pretending it never happened and seeing him at every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every family function for the rest of my childhood and teenage years. And at some point, you know, when I got to my teenage years, I totally blocked this out. I totally blocked it out. If you would have asked me when I was 20 years old if I had ever been molested, I would have told you no. I mean, it was totally absent from my memory. Um, my uncle is deceased now, but I used to travel around to go see him um, perform, and it's weird the way that our brains work, um, because it wasn't until I was, probably about 30, um, that all this stuff came back, and we can get into it. I was down in West Palm Beach, and I was out one night with a girl, and we were just out having a good time, and she said we need to leave right now. And I was like, okay. And so we got up and we left and got back home. And I was like, on the car ride, I was like, what's going on? She's like, I don't want to talk about it. Let's just get home. Let's just get home. So we got to the house, and I said, what's the deal? And she said, I saw my cousin there and he molested me when I was a kid, and I haven't seen him in years. And it was like a switch flipped and all this stuff came back from my childhood.
Just
And
her
it
state that sentence from her unlocked
yeah,
everything.
yeah,
Wow.
it opened the door, and it really freaked me out, and so much so that, I'm trying to console her and at the same time trying to make sense of what's happening in my own brain. And the next morning, I called my dad and I said, "Hey, I need to talk to you. I had something happen. All these memories came back, and I don't know if it's real or if it's not." And my dad got on a plane and flew from Ohio to West Palm Beach the next day and flew down and basically, I he said, "Well, tell me what you remember." And I told him, everything because all this stuff came back about the meeting afterwards and, what had happened. And he said, basically confirmed everything that I was saying was right on track. And there was a few details that, he updated me on. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like going through it again.
Did you feel like you were drowning?
Yeah, and that was, very parallel to the time when my drinking and drug use turned into something a little bit different. There were other factors that came in later that really turbocharged it, but all of a sudden, my drinking and behavior, um, there was fuel to it. There was part of me that was a victim, and I had never felt like a victim in my life up to that point. And over the next 10 years, that victim mentality uh, manifested in very negative ways in my life. And that situation, not only was it a horrible situation in itself, but it also became an excuse for me to excuse my own bad behavior and bad decisions and, turned into, well, you guys don't understand. And just to my parents, you don't care about me. If you cared about me, you would have done the right thing. You would have put him in jail. How could you let me go sit at things? That whole mentality, which there is a part of that is absolutely warranted, but there is also a part of me and my addiction and my drinking and drug use that almost gave me an excuse to do whatever, and because I had the trump card. If anybody tried to check me on what I was doing, or I could just play the ace of spades, and and it's just such a bad situation from every angle.
You said your father's a head basketball coach, your grandfather's a pastor, and they swept it under the rug. Was it just not wanting to bring shame on the family since it was a family member?
Well, that was part of the way that I felt about it. And I felt that way for years. And I felt betrayed. I felt hurt. And I had a son at this point, and I'm like, if somebody did that to my son, how could you handle it this way? And only later on down the road, through recovery, through healing, through working the steps of the program, did I get to a place where I was able to sit down with my dad, and I was very straightforward and honest with him about how I felt about all of it. And I said, if I just feel like you guys were looking out for yourselves, you weren't looking out for me. And my dad, one of the very few times in my life I've seen him tear up, uh, got teared up, and he said, "Son," he said, I was a 20-something-year-old parent, and I thought I was doing the best thing for you. I thought dragging you into a courtroom and making you relive this situation over and over and over again would be devastating to you and would do more damage than it would good. And so I thought I was protecting you. And if I could go back and change it and change anything, that would be one, because I had no idea that this would affect you the way that it has in your life. And I was only in a place to receive that message from him through working the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, through doing that reflection and really understanding my feelings about it, and being able to be accountable for my actions and the way that I also used that um, as an excuse for myself. And so that totally, I was able to forgive my dad. I was able to forgive him and forgive my grandparents, um, and even my uncle, and that he was totally separate from that. But all that resentment, and anger that I had towards them, I was able to lay that stuff down and get past it. And that was a big part of it, because for me, that hurt definitely went far beyond just my uncle. It affected all those relationships that now I cherish. I have a wonderful relationship with both my parents, and my grandfather has passed away, but I was able to forgive him. And that's what working the steps of the program did for me, and also my faith and forgiveness. If I want to be forgiven, I've got to be willing to forgive somebody else.
How dark did things get with the addictions?
In 2014, 2015, something like that, I was coming home from the office. I take that back. I was at lunch and I was headed back to my office, and the next thing I know, I woke up in the hospital, and hit a dump truck on the interstate. I had had a few mimosas, and at lunch, like a good alcoholic, just a regular work day, and heading back, and hit a dump truck that was broken down on the interstate. Broke my back, crushed my pelvis, both my hips, both my legs, both my feet, and ended up beginning a journey in the hospital. I was in the hospital for about 6 months, and then doing partial care and outpatient for another year, uh, and had to learn how to walk again. I mean, you name it. It was it was a life changing experience for me. But what I alluded to earlier, that was another place where my addiction changed, because number one, I got introduced to opiates and pain medication, which I was not familiar with. I had taken a pain pill, through the years. Somebody had one, whatever, you took it. But this was right at the time where the doctors were just writing out insane prescriptions for Oxycontin and oxycodone and all those things. And so um, I started, well, I wouldn't even say it was a battle. To me, I was like, well, I'm not an alcoholic anymore because I'm taking these pain meds, and I don't need alcohol. I was on medical grade heroin. I didn't
Yeah.
didn't look at it that way at that time, but I didn't drink, but I was in hindsight, I was doped up to the eyeballs on pain meds. And so at one point, I guess maybe probably a year and a half, 2 years after my wreck, I said, I don't think I need these anymore, and I just stopped taking them.
Really?
And I had no idea. I had no idea. I had never talked to my doctor, about stopping taking them. And I stopped, and all of a sudden, 12 hours later, my body went into, shock, and which I know now is opiate withdrawals, but I had no idea that that was a thing. And so I called the doctor and he said, "You can't just stop taking them. You gotta taper yourself down." And so that ended up turning into they got me on Suboxone um, to help get off the opiates. And then getting off the Suboxone is really what turned my alcoholism because then I started drinking again. And number one, while I was on Suboxone, that totally eliminated a hangover. If you're taking Suboxone and you drink alcohol, you take Suboxone in the morning, you don't have a hangover. It did not exist. I didn't know hangovers were a thing, or I didn't know what a real hangover felt like until eventually I got off Suboxone and then drank, and I was like, oh my god, this is how people, and the amount of alcohol I was drinking was insane. But to be able to drink that much with no consequence in the morning, uh, definitely played a role in my alcoholism because the first time I drank after being off of Suboxone, I was like, oh my god, this is terrible. And then I experienced the withdrawals from alcohol. But that really is when my recovery journey started.
When was?
At getting off the Suboxone, my alcoholism turned into I've got to drink to get out of bed. I've got to drink to function. It was not a go have a drink with my buddies at the bar and watch football. It was I need to drink to do everyday life.
And how long did you continue on like that before you?
Man, it was a vicious, vicious cycle for um, probably 5 or 6 years, and and it was in and out of treatment. I would go to treatment. Here's how the cycle went. I would go to treatment, get out, everything's great. It's a new beginning. I'm never drinking again. I'm never doing drugs again. Um, and if you would have asked me every single day that I left treatment if I was ever going to drink or do drugs again, I would have told you no stinking way. And what happened was everything would get good, life would get good, and then I would stop going to meetings. I would stop talking to my sponsor. I would stop doing all the things that got me sober. And then life would happen. Something bad would happen. And then I would relapse. And then I would feel all the guilt, shame, and remorse of relapse. And then it would emotionally devastate me. Um, and then I would either get arrested and end up back in treatment, or I would try to kill myself and end up back in treatment. And looking back on all of that, the trying to kill myself, I don't think, with the exception of one time, because there was like 4 attempts. The other three, I just wanted it to stop. I wanted the madness to stop, and I knew if I did that, that either it would work or I would end up in the hospital and they would put me in the psych ward for 72 hours on a psych hold, and that would open the door to treatment. And treatment became like a safe place where I knew I wouldn't have to deal with the nightmare of everything that was going on because in my alcoholism, I would lash out and destroy every relationship in my life. Any business relationships I had, I I had alienated everybody. The only people that were left in my life was family. Um, and people that were really, really close. Because anybody who was on the periphery that didn't love me in spite of me was like, screw this. I don't want anything to do with that guy. Because who would want to be around somebody like that? And I definitely don't blame any of those people. Um, so what? that creates is a dynamic of people who truly love you, who truly care about you. You know, you find out who the real ones are. But the flip side of that is when I would drink, since those were the only people that would even communicate with me, those were the people that I would lash out at. And at this point, I hadn't dealt with all the stuff from my childhood yet. So I had all the anger towards and resentment towards my mom, my dad, my brother, my grandfather, you know, everybody who was either involved or in any way in that situation. You know, I would drink, I would dwell on what happened to me, poor Paul. If you only knew, and then I would lash out at them and then wake up and be horrified by looking at my texts and I can't believe I sent this to my brother or my dad or my mom, who you name it, because I did it to all of them. And it was it was just a horrible vicious cycle. And what finally stopped that was John Maxwell. I'm sure you're familiar with the author. He was actually the pastor of my church in West Palm when I lived down there. So I used to get to go hear him speak. And he was preaching a message on change one time. And I wrote this down, and it was 4 reasons people will change their life. And I added one to this. So I changed it to 5 reasons people will change their life. And he said, when they see enough that they're actually inspired to, when they learn enough that they actually want to, when they receive enough that they're actually able to, when they're connected enough that they have a responsibility to, and that's family, or when they're hurting enough that they actually have to. And that last one for me was so true because I was finally hurting enough that I was willing to do whatever it took to change my life. And the solution to that was not a complicated one. It was one I had heard all the time in the rooms, and it was what all the old timers said. They said, just do these 4 things. If you do these 4 things, your life can change and your success in this program is really good. If you don't, it's not. And I would do 3 of those things. The 4 things are: go to a meeting every day, talk to your sponsor every day, work the 12 steps of this program, and have a network of guys around you. If you do those 4 things, your chances are excellent. Now, every time I would go into treatment and I would come out, I would do 3 of those things. I would do 2 of those things. I would go to meetings and get a sponsor, but I wouldn't work the steps. I would work the steps with a sponsor, but I wouldn't have a network of guys. I did every combination of those without actually doing those 4 things because I wanted to do it my way, because I'm special and I'm unique, and Paul's way is the right way. When I finally caved, when I was finally hurting enough that I was willing to set my ego aside and just do those 4 simple things, my life changed. And it has been an amazing ride since. But it took a lot of hurt and a lot of pain and a lot of, as anybody who's an alcoholic or a drug addict knows, our pain tolerance is amazing. Our threshold is very high. And so, it took, basically ruining my life. By the time I got better, the doctors told me I had 2 years to live if I kept drinking. My liver was shot, had cirrhosis, and they were like, "You're toast." I've had 3 heart attacks. I've had this car accident. I'm titanium from the waist down. I mean, if you saw a picture of me, just a few short years ago, it is not a pretty picture.
Do you get to a point where the pain of your addiction is greater than the pain of your trauma? And that's where, like, all right, my addiction isn't working anymore because it's greater than the trauma I'm trying to cover over with.
Here's what I would say. My solution to the trauma is this. I use the paradigm of assets and liabilities. To me, that that childhood trauma was a liability to me. It it was a monkey on my back. It was a sack of stones around my neck. It was something that I would drink over, that I would get depressed over, that I resented my family over, all these negative things that were attached to that situation. Um, and through working the steps of this program, uh, I was able to what we talked about earlier, and that was help somebody else out who had been through a similar situation. And every time I speak to a large group of people, I always talk about what happened to me because, as I'm sure you're very well aware, men don't talk about this. It's one of those taboo subjects, and you know, not that it's any easier for women to talk about it, but it seems to be a lot more socially acceptable for a woman to talk about it, and it's so much more rampant. I mean, it's horrifying the numbers uh, of people who've been through what we've been through on male or female. Um, but for men, it's not a rare thing. It's a lot more common than people think, but it's rare for men to talk about it. And so I always talk about it. So now I'm at a place where I've helped enough men that this thing has that was such a liability in my life has now turned into an asset because it's the most valuable tool that I have to help somebody else who's gone through something similar. And now I've helped enough men that this thing holds more value and positive weight than this thing holds negative weight. So this thing is now more valuable. And if I could go back and change it and remove it, I would, because this thing is so much more valuable now, which is amazing.
Wow.
That's amazing.
That's an awesome transformation.
I mean, if you would have told me that, like somebody said that to me in the beginning of recovery, like, hey, that's the best thing that ever happened to you, I would have said, you're crazy.
I've talked about that too. Like, I wouldn't be where I'm at without having gone through what I went through. Does that mean I wanted to get raped at age 12? No. But can I find purpose in all of that pain by helping others? Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's what God does.
So it goes from a liability to an asset. I never thought of it that way, but that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And I look at that as, uh, anything, any past trauma, because this is such uh, a dramatic example of childhood trauma, but there's all kinds of you know things that aren't as huge and dramatic that we go through. And anytime I identify something like that by working the steps of this program, uh, that's the way I look at it now. I mean, that is my program of recovery, is moving things out of this column and into this column. And the way that I get over this is by using it to help somebody else. And the more I can do that, that stuff just loses its weight. And we can sit here and have a conversation. I'm sure that there was a time in your life, Clark, where, even thinking about talking to somebody about this would have been horrifying, you
Ooh,
know?
that wasn't going to happen.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And now to be able to sit here and have a conversation and smile and laugh, and that's the power of dealing with these traumas.
How long ago did you, make your final step towards recovery? How long has it been that you got clean and sober?
24 hours, man. 24 hours is all I got. That is all I bank on.
That's as
I,
far as you look back.
I don't collect chips anymore. That is all that matters to me is the next 24 hours. And because my recovery is only good for 24 hours, I have to do something every single day for my recovery, whether that's talking to my sponsor, going to a meeting, talking to somebody else, whatever it is. I have to do something every single day to remind myself that, hey, this thing is out there. It's out there and waiting. And at this point in my life, it's been a while since I've had to deal with it. But if I rest on my laurels and start to slide into that, I got this, I'm good now, I'm in trouble. So I don't even look at it that way anymore.
So you continually build on your recovery.
Yeah, that was, and that for me was, I'm glad you said that. Um, when I was in treatment the last time, um, I was there, and I think that was somewhere around 2020, 2021. Um, they, I was talking to a psychologist, and I was like, I don't know how to get that fire back that I had the first time I was in here, because it was sad. I was the guy that went into treatment, and I knew all the staff. I was like, "Hey, how are you? Good to see you again." They're like, "Well, we're glad you're back. We're glad you're here." And but I asked the psychologist, like, "Man, I don't know how to get that fire back that I had, that excitement the first time I was here." And he said, "That's not how recovery works, man." He said, "You don't. He said your days might start over, but you build on recovery." Every single time you've had to come back through here, it is not a waste as long as you learn from that experience and understand, dissect what happened, what were the decisions that you made that landed you back here. As long as you can identify those things, then this is a building block to make your recovery stronger moving forward. And there is no guarantee that I won't end up back there again. But I know from experience now that as long as I do something every day, as long as I do those four things, that my recovery is safe. Um, and so I just try to keep it simple, not overcomplicate it, because that's easy to do in this program, but just do something every day that's going to remind me, and be proactive, because you're either moving forward or you're moving backwards. There is no in the middle or in between.
If I asked you to sum up your journey, life lessons, regrets, daily habits, positive routines, what would you want to share with the audience?
I would definitely say create a routine, a positive routine. Every morning I get up, I pray, I read, I do a meeting at 7 a.m. every morning online. That's a Zoom meeting. And then at some point in the day, I either meet with an alcoholic or a drug addict, I meet with my sponsor. Um, I do something in that area every single day. And those are just the part of the structure of my daily routine. But those things to me are like daily guideposts. Number one, reading something positive that's moving me in the right direction, um, helps me continue to grow. Um, but the most important thing about a routine like that is, uh, recognizing when you stop doing something. If I stop praying in the morning, something's wrong. If I stop talking to my sponsor, something's wrong. And those are red flags to me now. So that to me is because my recovery is the most important thing outside of God and my children. And really, it sounds wrong to say it this way, but really I should put it, before my children, because if I lose my recovery, I lose my children. Um, and so that is what's so important. So that positive routine, if I could encourage anybody to do anything, man, get up, have a relationship with your higher power, whatever that is. Don't let it be superficial, let it be real. When I pray, prayer is talking to God, meditation is listening to God. And so if I pray for 5 minutes, I shut up for 5 minutes. and just listen and meditate. If I pray for 20, I sit for 20. And that doesn't happen that frequently. I'm not trying to put that kind of weight on anybody. Sometimes it's 2 minutes, but my prayers today are prayers of gratitude. They're not prayers of, I need you to fix this for me. Um, I have such confidence in my relationship with my higher power that if there is something that I need to overcome, it's a prayer of gratitude that I've already overcome that, and for him working out the way for that to happen. And that's just a complete outlook on life. I don't pray for solution to problems. I just give gratitude that I know that they will be resolved. And that's the kind of confidence that you read about in the Bible. James says, when you pray, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave tossed in the sea, and he should expect to receive nothing. And that's a scary verse, because I don't want to receive nothing. So you got to pray with that confidence that it's already done. So creating a positive routine, to me, I think, is just an easy step for anybody to do, but one that will absolutely change your life if you do it consistently.
I'm right with you. My girlfriend maybe like 6 months ago, because I got a whole morning routine. And she's like, "Why are you so anal with your morning routine?" And I'm just like, "Do you want me to go back to living like the animal I was?" I go, "If you don't, I got to do this then, you know." And she's like, "All
Absolutely.
right, I get it." So, you got to start the day off on a right tone. You got to set the tone for the day. You're gonna wake up. You're gonna be like, my praying is mostly gratitude as well. Like I'm just so thankful and grateful for where I'm at right now, from coming from where I was.
And what you've been through, man, you have such a inspirational and powerful story, because, man, there's so many levels to yours. I was sharing it with um, somebody last night, and it's amazing how what God can do to transform these things that we go through, um, and use us. That's how, look at the people in the Bible that God used. It was not the perfect, the perfect people of his day. It was the people that had something to overcome, and it gives you that value. You gotta, like you said, my mess is my message.
Right on. If people want to find you, what's the name of your podcast? Where do they find you on social media?
Yeah, you can go to any social media. Paul Steele podcast is there. My book, The Law, you can find on Amazon. Just search Paul Steele, The Law. But yeah, any social media, you just put in Paul Steele podcast, and you'll find me. And anybody's welcome to reach out.
Thanks, bro. I appreciate you being here. I'm glad you're still alive. I'm glad you're still with us, and I'm glad you're helping others.
Yeah, man, it was an absolute pleasure, Clark. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on, and we'll have to flip it around. You have to come on the Paul Steele podcast here one day in the future.
All right, brother. There you have it, everybody. Paul Steele, turning his mess into a message. And if he can do it, if I can do it, you can do it too. Get some healthy habits and get some higher power. And you got to get clean and sober. And you got to address your past. You can't keep running from it. So we'll see you next week. Peace.